Welcome. Good afternoon, my friends. Happy Father's Day. Thank you for making some time. I could say taking the time, but really time doesn't just appear. You have to make the time for something. So thank you for making the time for some thoughtful discussion today. My Father's Day is usually spent driving home from Lily's War. And so I am glad to have friends to talk to today besides my children, who I'm having a fantastic day with. But thank you for joining us to talk about franchise. And, leading it off today, Yurik and Cai are going to lead the discussion. And let's see where it takes us. Yurik, get us started.
Actually, Cai's going to start us off. We talked about this.
Good. Awesome.
Yeah. Franchise. Yurik wanted me to lead off with the definition of it. I'm going to give you my definition, because you could look on the internet and find all sorts of wordy definitions for what it really is, all sorts of explanations for what other people think it is. So it's kind of one of the most nebulous virtues that we have, or that has been designated within our world. A lot of people, including myself, pretty much just call it the it factor. It's one of those that, in my personal opinion, it is the practice of all of the virtues together that make up what I consider chivalry. So it's the everyday practice to me, and that's my big question for everybody is, how do you practice it in your daily activities? But it's the application of the virtues. Are you kind to people? Do you give of your time and energy? Do you help others? Do you work on your prowess in all things, not just on the field? It's a combination of everything to me. That's why I'm most proud that it's the one at the bottom of my scroll that is the foundation of everything. So because to me, that's what it is. I mean, I've been wanting to be chivalry my whole life. So, I mean, to be at this point, I'm very fortunate, and I want to encourage and share with others to do that. So franchise, to me, is the it factor, and it's why it's why I chose the squires I chose, because to me, they exhibit it without any training. So there you go. Now to my squire, Yurik.
Okay, so all of that makes me giggle, and that's part of why I wanted you to go first with the definition, is because the moment that Hirsch came to me and said, would you like to do the part of the conversation on this, the first thing I did was I messaged you. I'm like, this is cool. I don't know what this virtue is, which I don't know if that's saying something about me, but I had no idea what this was, especially as it was connected to the SCA. So I had to do some of my own research leading into this. My definition, after I've been looking at this and reading this and trying to figure out how this all fits into the SCA at large, is it's this freedom to choose what you're going to do, the freedom to choose who you're going to be, and how that plays within the society. It's the freedom to be virtuous. It's the freedom to show all the other virtues that we've spent the last several weeks talking about. And within that, I've come to, I think along the same lines as Cai, it's one of the most important ones, because if you don't choose to be virtuous, then the rest of them just sort of go out the window.
Those are both great comments to start. I'm going to pause and let anybody who has additional comments or questions go, because each of the things, Cai and Yurik, that you guys said resonate with me, and I could just talk. Oh, I am talking. Does anybody have additional comments and questions that you'd like to add or ask.
This is Logan. To me, it's bearing. How do you comport yourself? And much like Yurik said, it is the acting virtuous, all of the virtues. The franchise is, as His Grace Donegal said a couple of weeks ago, typically you can look at someone and see the way they are interacting with others, whoever those others are, and tell whether or not that person has franchise. You can see it in their bearing, you can see it in the way they treat the people, you can see it in the way they interact with the world. And so you can often, probably not always, but often you can tell by watching someone without seeing their complete actions every day, just through some short interactions with other people, whether they be peers or commons or whoever, and see whether or not they have franchise.
Well said, Logan. I agree with you. You can see it, and sometimes you see it peppered within their actions over the course of months and years, and other times you see it the first moment you bump into somebody and interact with them, and it is a enlivening thing to notice when you notice. I am going to, on purpose, take a contentious perspective with one of the things Cai said about, first I'm going to agree, because it is absolutely the most mysterious of the virtues. But it is also, I want to disagree on this one, because I think you said it's the most important. And we've said several times in these conversations that the virtues are well-worn tools for thinking. They're all related, and no one is more important than the others. And franchise may seem like it is because it's the most mysterious, but I would say that it is that they are all still equally important. And one of the things I've been thinking about this, Cai, when you said it's the it factor, that resonates with me. I was thinking about this one a bit, and one of my opinions is franchise means getting the other virtues right most of the time. And maybe it's the ability to make sure that you're using the correct tool out of the toolbox, to use that analogy again. If you are really good at using honesty, because when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And then you encounter that moment where being too honest is a mistake, and you need to be courteous, or you need to provoke a conversation about faith with someone instead of merely being honest and being a hammer on the topic. That, in my opinion, choosing a different tool when one very familiar virtue or conversation has become your go-to is one aspect of franchise. That's my opinion. I'd like to hear somebody else. We've got a lot of new people joining. Thank you.
I want to talk for a second about some of the stuff on Garrick's essay, because Garrick puts a few interesting points out there. I think the hardest one is that franchise can't be learned. It's one of the few ones that it's really difficult to learn, and it's really difficult to teach because it's so hard to quantify. But he does tie it in with that it factor of that sense of nobleness. And like, for me, that's you close your eyes and you picture like the epitome of the knight in the SCA, or you picture the epitome of the pelican or the laurel. Who pops into your mind? that person probably practices franchise without even trying. They just are. They have that it piece of franchise. He also points out that it's really difficult to walk that fine line between not overdoing franchise, because you've got this being helpful, being positive, being virtuous, and how easy it can be to cross over into the dark side of those things.
I think that's part of our earlier discussions on some of the virtues about, you know, taking a little time for yourself and recharging, because, you know, to be on your game all the time in front of everybody, if you're not used to it, it's troublesome. As some people have said in the past, you know, you're spending all your effort and energy to maintain, and then you've got to take some time for yourself. But I've come to find in my life, as I mature like a bad cheese, that if it's regulated into your everyday life, then it becomes a part of who you are. And I don't know, I've got a glass half full kind of thing, or maybe even 3/4 full kind of viewpoint lately, after the year that I've had been laid off and finding a new job and everything. And that, you know, faith, courtesy, honesty, all those things come into play and are every bit individual parts of, to me, franchise, and help me land a new role. And it just makes things in life, I don't know, seem easier, because for all intents and purposes, you're honest with yourself. So discussions, folks, please.
I really like the idea of applying them to yourself as well as you apply them to others. I'm not sure I've heard anybody state it that concisely before, but that resonates with me, and that is something I've been trying to improve on.
Hirsch, it was stated that franchise is something that can't be learned, and I wanted to comment right away, and I wanted to stop and think about it before I did. I disagree. I think we absolutely can, and have seen over the years many examples of people who have learned, you know, who have learned or have become exemplars of franchise over time. If I recall correctly, franchise comes from Old French word that meant freedom, and to a degree, you know, the nobility of the air had the freedom to act in certain ways that other people couldn't. And I think the same thing happens in the SCA too. We have people come in who don't really feel they have the freedom to act in certain ways. They're not ready or willing to step up. And it's until they learn that that it's okay to step up in appropriate ways, whether you don't have to wait till you're to be a peer or a duke, that anybody can, you know, can act in the right thinking ways. I mean that's a little twisted thinking, but I think we teach people that all the time. One, they can, and two, also people who just have no idea and watch examples of people. They say, I want to be that someday, and kind of figure it out.
Those are great points, Fernando. And I believe it can be taught and it can be learned, but it is challenging and maybe perhaps subtle. But Kate, to what you said early on, you said you always knew that being a knight and the ideals of the virtues and chivalry were attractive to you since childhood. I think that's true of most of us. And I also think that's true of many people who are not in the FCA. So a conversation about the virtues and how they can help you or someone else or a group of people to improve themselves or to improve everyone, can be something that is actually not limited to just within the society. And to what Fernando said, we, written in corpora, we are all nobles. From the moment we step into an event, we are all nobles. Why shouldn't we all be trying to act with franchise and improve how we act with each of the virtues?
And to continue from Fernando's thoughts about acting in such a way, regardless of your station in the society, some of my most helpful feedback and advice I've gotten with some, thoughts from the non-peer peanut gallery is a slightly pedantic argument even, but I think it's really helpful to say that the society and the crown does not make peers, they recognize them. And this idea of acting with a certain comportment and acting according to the chivalric virtues and behaving in such a way that aligns with those aspirations, like Cai was saying, is not just the exclusive domain of a certain segment of the society, whether that's peerages as a whole or a certain order of peerage. I think those lessons on one hand and those attitudes that we want to aspire to, like it's just as relevant as it is for me as it is, for resident 2-3 times Super Duke on the call, right? It's for everybody, and I think that's a helpful thing to keep in mind for those of us who look up to the historical antecedents of these values, but then also have a lot of people, real flesh and blood, folks with struggles and frustrations and aspirations and hopes and dreams that we know in the society that we look up to the peers in the SCA as examples of that as well.
I fear that I may have a little bit misrepresented Garrett's point on the whole franchise cannot be taught. He goes on to say that it can be grown into, which goes into what you were saying, Hugo, where you can have it, but sometimes you have to struggle through those failures to reach those levels. And that idea that everybody has the opportunity to be a peer, and you have to strive for perfection within those things, within those virtues.
Interestingly, I was looking at some notes that I had written about franchise, God, I don't even know how many years ago. And at one point early in the page, I wrote, "It can't be taught." And later on, I have a note saying, you can grow into it, which I may have pulled from Garrick by that point, who knows. That how easy it is to turn, if you try to put it on like an act, and I think this may come from Garrick originally. If you try to put it on like an act, it can easily, or a costume, it can easily come across as arrogance. I don't know if that came across Garrick's article or not, but it wouldn't surprise me because it sounds like him. So.
It does say that in there. I have to agree with what everybody's saying on this. I agree with both points. It can't be taught, but it can be grown into. I know from my own experience, and I've seen it with other people. It's one of those that, it's that growing up, and it's like becoming an adult, but not being 18 years old. It's that you're starting to act like an adult now, not, just because you're legally one. Same thing with because you come into the SCA, you're now a noble. Okay. But when you start acting like one, then to me, that's franchise.
So in that sense, it's maturity, because, maturity means that you have learned enough to act like an adult and to act in the proper way in the proper situation. And, I think you were saying earlier, Cai, but whoever said, if you do it all the time, then it becomes your regular, and this is, all the time, meaning not in the SCA and in the SCA, then it becomes your regular state of existence. You don't have to think about it. I mean, there's Mark Twain said, if you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything, meaning you don't have to remember what you lied about. If you do this all the time, then if you act with maturity, with thinking about what you're doing, with, is this, asking yourself, is this an honorable way to go about this? All that sort of stuff. It becomes second nature, and that's what you do. And I also think that it means that you don't let stuff pass by. You take responsibility for what's going on and make it happen. It's in that way. It affects leadership. Something needs to be done. Nobody wants to do it. Then step up, do it. Get people to help you if necessary. That's the sort of thing.
Very good points, Kirk. I actually, the last thing you said about taking responsibility for something that's happening really resonates with me, because I can't count the number of times where I've been like, oh, I should have said something. And I've been trying to improve on that and to act in the moment instead of wishing I had, because that's the right thing to do.
We're getting into another thing that I have written down on my notes. Franchise is this concept of standing with your principles and not changing who you are and how you want to behave based on others' expectations of yourself. And I have a question tied to that, but I want to see if anyone has anything to say about the like standing with your principles and all that.
Well, that's fine as long as you got your principles in the right spot in the first place. And you got to, examine those principles and decide whether they're the right thing if you're going to stand with them all the time. If your principle is that, say I'm a knight and therefore I can, just do whatever the heck I want, well, that's the wrong principle. You're not going to be able to get away with that, and you're thinking the wrong thing. That's something you got to align your principles with what reality is, and make sure that you're good with what's expected around too. And if everybody expects X and you think dedicated, that in a dedicated way, after thinking about it, that X is wrong and you got to do Y, then go ahead. You just got to realize where you're coming from, but you've given it proper consideration.
Is that sort of along the lines of dress for the job you want, or act like the job you want? And that's what I've been trying to model my life after, even before I became chivalry. If I comported myself like a peer and acted like a peer, and did it even in mundane life, acted like a boss, comported myself like a boss, and took responsibility for my actions. It's that whole dress for the job you want, right? Not just physical appearance, but dress, your attitude, your bearing, everything,
Characteristics of chivalry as they pertain to the soul, not just to the body, to go back to all.
I know in my case, many years ago, one of my early role models was Countess Elizabeth. She wasn't even a countess when I met her. And that was somebody I admired, and I tried to be more like her. And over time, I think I sort of have gotten closer to that. It really is. It's try to be the person you want to be instead of the person you think you are. And eventually it sort of works.
I guess that goes to the idea. We can certainly model after others, but when other people help you and tell you, no, you're doing it wrong, isn't that teaching it? For those who figure it out, sometimes that that being talked to is also the way you grow up or grow into it. But I think that when we help people figure when they're not doing it and encourage when they do, that it is teaching it. That's kind of what, one of the things that changed my mind over time, I think.
So this Okay, in my brain, this all ties together. Let's see if I can get it out in a way that makes sense. So you mentioned teaching it, and I think that ties into the honesty aspect that we talked about a few weeks ago, in that teaching from an honest standpoint can be a good or a bad thing, depending on how you do it. If you're honest in a constructive and positive manner, and the person is able to accept your criticism, then it can end in a positive way. If you're honest with the intention of causing some sort of harm, being brutally honest, or in some sort of negative way, then that whole scenario can go like a different direction. Franchise is knowing when and how to apply those things. Franchise is the effective use of honesty in that situation, knowing when to be honest, how to be honest, or when to discuss faith, when to be courteous. Franchise is the ability to use the other virtues in the most constructive way possible. Maybe.
It goes back to this guy's toolbox, right? Hirsch's.
I mean, you're pointing at me on my screen.
Oh yeah, I was pointing at Hirsch on my screen.
Like, I'm in the middle of a night sandwich right here. It's kind of weird.
Using Yurik, you had a phrase, use the other virtues in the most constructive way possible. To me, that resonates with the ideals as opposed to the practical. It's like you might have a fantastic moment where you realize you said the right thing at the right moment, and you did something, and you feel like you totally nailed it, 10 out of 10. And then 3 hours later, you're like, oh, that's only 95%. That's not, I could have done one thing a little better. And again, both of those are that's a hypothetical example, but when you said in the most constructive way possible, that's absolutely, for me, that resonates as the ideal. But in the practical, I sort of wonder if you're ever at the most constructive way possible, but that's just because I don't always know. I'm not sure.
Actually, on Yurik's point, the question about when you're going to be, there's times you don't be too honest or honestly too much step up and act like a peer. There's times that's not the right moment or the right thing, and that's kind of falls to the definition of the difference between a virtue and a vice. It's a knightly virtue when it's done for positive reasons. If you use honesty to hurt somebody, it's no longer a virtue. It's a vice. And the same thing, I think, if you step up and act super peer-like on somebody who it's gonna force to step down or step back, that's and it's not the right thing to be doing that on, then that's not a virtue either.
I'm going to bring up those. I like what you said, Fernando. I'm going to bring up one other point that I merely remember from memory because, as I've said before, I'm not a medieval scholar. Somebody pointed out on an earlier conversation where franchise got brought up and discussed, that of all the virtues on the list, it is least medieval, that it is post-period, that it's more of a modern characterization. And I have no idea if that's actually true, but it does stand out as from my perspective, it stands out as one that looks back on the virtues as almost an SCA virtue, not as they were, but as they should have been.
I think,
go ahead.
go ahead. Well, I think that is right in a sense that we don't really, as modern day people, we don't really simulate people's attitudes to others of a different social rank very well. I mean, we don't have the kowtowing peasant. We don't have the shall we say the monk's obvious deference to the bishop or the cardinal. We don't have that stuff, and I think then this is something that we value because it means that we can put an idealized value in there that actually matches a little more of modern attitude, in that you got to act like you're a peer. So we all say we're nobles, but you got to act like it, and we can call it franchise or whatever we want to call it. I don't disagree with not having that simulation of medieval attitudes, because I find that, frankly, an unfortunate aspect of medieval life, but it was there, and that's how people did it, and we don't have that.
So I have a question for the group. Focusing in a little bit on the idea that, on one part of it, the idea that franchise is standing with your principles, assuming your principles are worth standing by, and not changing based on others' expectations of you. What challenges do we have in our game that make this virtue a struggle? And I'm saying this from the perspective of a non-peer who wants to be a peer. What challenges are there to be yourself in a society where there are groups of people who expect you to act not yourself?
I'd like to chime in here real quick, because I've had a little bit of time to think about this. I guess he was kind of prepped me, but it's also one of those that I have an immediate response to that too. It's it's being able to be seen being yourself. So there's the biggest part about what we do is social interaction, which is why the pandemic has been a struggle for all of us. We love to go camp together, hang out, do things together, and the camaraderie that brings. But I think that you can be yourself without having to change being yourself. But I think the biggest part is people's perception of you is changed as they get to know you. A lot of people have made assumptions about me in the past, and once they got to know me, changed those assumptions. But it took time putting myself out there, which can be difficult sometimes, but it took time being in front of people, interacting with them, and making them understand just by being myself who I really am and what I really stand for. And to me, I think that's my response to the question.
I like that answer, Cai. And it's one interpretation of how we improve ourselves by being comfortable enough with ourselves to be ourselves. And then if we, find something we need to improve on, we don't try to just act like it's not there. We try to actually fix that thing so that we can still be ourselves, not just hide a flaw or polish over it with acting. As you were talking about being comfortable talking to people, it reminded me of going to demos where Fernando was the MC, for lack of a better term, and ran phenomenal, energetic and concise descriptions for people who had never heard of the SCA, who covered so many different aspects in ways that were engaging. And, in many ways, I would leave a demo with another nugget that I might use to talk to people who'd never run into the SCA because of something that Fernando had said that stuck with me as accessible and open. And I would just make that part of myself as part of how I talk to people about the SCA. Now I went off on a tangent. Somebody else talk.
Somebody save us.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know if we're ready to move a little bit, but I'd be kind of interested in a little bit of conversation about it in the modern world for us as we move out. I mean, I talk to my students about the knightly virtues as a way of framing, the actions that we expect out of our guys. It helps in our school's mascot is the Knights, you know, but when I teach them Frenchies, you know, I tell them it's, for them, I tell them it's acting according to the state, as appropriate for their state. And, you know, that they should be the best student they could be. You know, no, you don't get to stand up and talk to an adult in a, you know, as an equal, but, you know, you have to be respectful of position and things like that. But also they need to put out they need to look like an example of a student for others, you know, I guess, you know, of a good student for others. And I was thinking about times in the rest of the world that where how you come across is so important. And look at seeing Verena on the screen, it's kind of like doctors have got, you know, that's when a doctor walks into a room, you know, and I can't imagine it for, you know, an emergency room situation, it's got to be 100 times more important when you got seconds to immediately instill a sense of trust and competence to people. It's got to be a big deal. I mean, I'm kind of interested in hearing some people's ideas of how it applies in the, you know, like.
I was back in the day, and was an Air Force officer, and we were taught when I went to officer training school that you know, you can't just be flying off the handle. You can't be swearing all the time. You save these things for really significant moments where you need emphasis. And so it's better to inspire confidence by maintaining a level attitude or a level temper, I guess you could say. And, you know, you be prepared, you know what you're going to do in certain circumstances. If it's unusual circumstances, then you fall back on, okay, find out what the information is, go get this thing and do it. Don't just flail around. So being a solid, you know, prepared, ready to take, I don't say necessarily take charge, but ready to execute your job individual is what can be done in the modern world on this. I think it means that you're ready to go. You don't panic. You're ready to take the responsibility of doing what you need to do.
Hi, Verena here. I guess I've been called out a little bit.
Sorry.
So there is, I am a very different person than I was when I was 18 and hadn't even gone to college yet. And it's not so much that I am totally different. I've learned a lot. I've grown a lot. So the virtue of Frenchies is actually one of our favorites. Gavin's sitting right beside me, for those of you we're not on screen for, but from the idea that it's about believing what you are doing matters and acting as if that is true. And in our game, that manifests in all sorts of ways, from the virtues to the development of your persona, to your presentation on the field, to the little renovations you put into your camp from time to time. You're believing that what we are doing is important. And my modern career, I'm a resident physician. I am in my first year as a doctor, very close to beginning my second year as a doctor. And clearly this is something you do because you truly believe that it matters. And the sense of confidence and of calm that I have been able to develop to this point has come from developing a sense of self about what I'm doing, as well as accumulating the necessary knowledge to honestly be confident in what I'm saying. So that's a lot of years of school, a lot of years of studying. It's also a lot of years of observing physicians, some of whom I admire greatly and some of whom are, you know, okay at their jobs, and figuring out what they did that was a good touch, something that I think would work for me, and watching how they interact with patients and with the other members of the medical staff. And so I agree also wholeheartedly with the idea that franchise isn't something that you just have or don't have, but it's something that it takes time to grow into, come to the terms with what matters to you, to act, to truly believe that it matters, and how are you going to act out in the world, showing that what matters to you is important.
Ford will agree with the teachings the same way. Honestly, Mrs. Schreier is more of a persona than Ellis had ever thought of being. When I'm in the classroom, I'm real different than what you normally see.
I can second that. Mr. Green is not at all who Yurik is.
I know Joan's pretty much like Rhiannon, except Joan's not quite as goofy, I think. But I think being in the SCA and having to, put that out there and have that put myself out there and have that bearing has made me a good consultant, because I'm on stage every day when I'm with a client, listening to their needs and, trying to look at things from their perspective. So I think the diversity of people that I've encountered in the SCA and, learning to be around people that, and embrace being around people that I don't normally, otherwise would never have encountered because they don't live in my neighborhood and they don't work with me and all of that, has really made me better in my everyday life. And maybe that helps with franchise because, if it's something that comes from within and you're showing the person you are within, then the SCA person and the modern person, in a sense, merge, I guess.
I arguably the bravest thing I ever did in my life was when I applied to be Kingdom Seneschal years ago, because that was such a stretch out of my comfort zone. And I think that not too long after I stepped down as Kingdom Seneschal, I got the job I eventually retired for, which was extremely challenging. I was running the gifted program for insert school district here. And I don't think I could have done that before I had done the Kingdom Seneschal job. At least I don't think I could have done it as successfully. Because that helped a lot with developing, leadership skills and confidence in myself and all that.
I said, I joked about how Mr. Green and Yurik are two very different people, but then I'm sitting here thinking about it and thinking about what Rhiannon said, and I'm like, no, they're actually not all that different. It's just the expectations upon those two different people are different. The expectations of Yurik are completely different than what is expected of me when I walk into the classroom. But all the skills that I learned from the classroom, the comfort speaking in front of people, being able to think on your feet, things like that, those all do show up elsewhere.
For me, it's the other way around. I had decades of SCA experience before I changed and went into a classroom. So being comfortable speaking in front of a crowd took me into the classroom comfortably.
I liked one of the things you said, be the best X. You say to your students, be the best student you can. And I think that as we just had this roundtable of people talking about their letting their true self, their honest self out at work so that they can be that best role at work is one aspect of that, because to a certain extent each of us plays a role. But when we choose a role that's important to us, that we feel in our heart, we're going to put an energy into that is perceptible. People will respond to that in a way that's different from somebody who's, you've probably all met at least one of these people. They show up, they're there to do the job, but they don't really care. And so when you can find that job, the career that you are philosophically and emotionally invested in, it shows. And by letting that shine through, your modeling one of the best ways to do that thing. You're being virtuous.
Well, maybe, I mean, to be fair, when I tell the kids, be the best student you can be, it's really prowess. I tell them prowess is doing what you do to the best of your ability. But I tell them when they show other people that they're doing that, that's the franchise. But to carry on to the rest of your statement, I think when you have that excitement about stuff, or that knowledge that carries over about stuff, whatever it is that is the driving force for your personality in that given situation, that's really when you generate that sense of wonder, or the sense of awe. And Ramon Lowell, I think it was in his description, certainly when he's talking about knights, he says that knights should always always create a sense of reverential awe. And reverential is basically just respect, right? So if you can respect the wonder or the awesomeness of something, that's really one of the key features for the knight that Lowell calls a knight, or the Lowell says a knight has to do, not just doesn't define a knight.
So I wanted to kind of speak on something Yurik had mentioned about that the expectations of Yurik are different than the expectations of Mr. Green. And while I can understand that concept, I would think that I would like to challenge him to find that, or to look at things just a little bit differently and realize that, at least in my eyes, I don't think the expectations are any different, really. I think it's the perception that we cultivate of what others around us we think they want of us. Because that, and to me, that's kind of the hidden subtext of something like franchise, is that your freedom of action is like being true to yourself. That's that ick factor. You are who you are, and you're good with that, and you own it, and you do good things with it. Because if you're a bad person and you own it, then I guess that's not really franchise in my eyes. But it's one of those that I've had to readjust and look at the way I look at things. And I realized by looking at people, like, I spent a good amount of time thinking that they thought ill of me, when I just come to realize that was my perception of what I thought they thought, that really most people just didn't care, because they didn't really know me. So I had to find a way to be myself, but put myself out there for people to get to know me. And that way I've got that sense of perception that they understood who I was. Does that make sense to people, how that kind of works out? That, I feel like I'm talking in circles, but it's that the world is what we perceive it, so it's a matter of, if we apply the same things all the time and we think everybody thinks and expects the same things from us, that makes our life a little bit easier in my eyes.
Sometimes groups and places and encounters need different things, right? I mean, sometimes the SCA needs a sense of joyful playfulness that may not be appropriate in a work situation. It's not what's necessary in the middle of a job that people are getting paid for or something. I don't know. It just kind of touches one little piece of it. So I think being able to read the room, as it were, or the situation, and act as appropriate, not just for yourself, but for yourself in that situation, isn't always the exact same. You're the same person, but you're going to react in different ways.
Yeah, post-revel in a classroom may not go over well.
I couldn't hear that, Yurik.
I said a post-revel in a classroom may not go over well.
Neither would stabbing somebody.
Works pretty good to science classroom.
Blowing stuff up. Is there We've heard from
Oh, there we
few
go.
people. Yeah, there we go.
All right.
Hoping to hear from more.
I think it depends on just how granular we want to be about whether our expectations are the same. Definitely both the SCA and my day job expect me to be a warm and competent individual, but if I'm putting an IV or a breathing tube in someone in an SCA event, things have gone very, very wrong. And so there's this kind of, my day job is, the stakes are pretty darn elevated. I am with people in extraordinarily dangerous, extraordinarily vulnerable, extraordinarily uncomfortable positions, to a certain extent where I have to ratchet up the compassion to the nth degree. And hopefully when I am spending some time with someone on the field or sharing a meal, no kidding, I want to be warm and compassionate for both of those situations, but everything to the nth degree is very tiring.
That's a really good point, Verena. We want to be warm and compassionate and welcoming. And actually, I think every single one of us is and has been welcoming to new people. And sometimes we get that sense of, I'm tired, I'm not sure I'm ready to talk to this new person, or I'm not sure I have all of the ability to listen to what they're interested in right now. And we look around for somebody else to maybe pass that baton to. But that's an aspect of self-knowledge that really helps to behave, to deliver the best role you can for yourself while still remaining true to your principles. And Kay, I think when you said meet other people's expectations yet remain true to your principles, I've been in situations where I've perceived that someone was goading someone else to do something that maybe was a little beyond what was expected, what was, potentially, insulting or base or something that they didn't think they would do, almost like, daring them to be a little more audacious than they usually are. And that person might actually respond in a positive way, do what was expected, but not in the way that was expected, and remain true to their principles. And it's always fun to surprise yourself with a way that you can meet people's expectations instead of just saying, no, I can't do that, but still remain true to your principles. Other comments or questions? I am going to close this session the way I have each time in the past. I am going to close with a thing and a drink, and I'm going to pour. Then I'm going to talk about the thing because that's important with this vessel, with this horn, to give it a little time. This is a Samuel Smith's Nut Brown. It's from Far, Far Away, and it's delicious. This is a seal. And when I decided to close everything with a thing and a toast, I realized I had the perfect thing for franchise. As you can tell, this seal has an oak tree and stag's attire. So it's very clearly mine, but I didn't make it. I don't have that skill. It was given to me by Duke Øyríkr, not for me to have, but specifically for witnessing a period scroll for a pelican. And I thought it was one of the most elegant aspects of franchise, where it's like he contacted us in advance and said, I want to make this for you. If you don't have one, if you have a seal, then just bring it. And if you don't have one, I'll make one for you. I'm like, wow, that was amazing. And so for this toast, not only am I going to toast to everyone's health, but Eowyn, thank you for joining us. And thanks to your peer, Øyríkr, for making me this seal. To your health, everyone.
To yours.
To yours as well, Your Grace.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy Father's Day.
Thank you all.
Father's Day.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye, everyone.